Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is part 2 of the Ukraine war news update for the 27th of July 2023. My first video has already been restricted, pretty standard par for the course stuff. Let's hope this one doesn't have any mention of anything dodgy in it. Right, we're going to go to the front line first, and before I say anything about that, of course, I need to mention that there's a lot of operational security, fog of war, claims coming from both sides about what is happening in certain places. It is difficult to get a really solid handle on what is taking place. This is kind of partly my best guess and partly just throwing a bunch of sources to you and allowing you to make up your mind as to what's going on. So we'll start off with Hannah Maliar, who is the Deputy Defence Minister, giving a synopsis of the East and South. This came out yesterday afternoon, so a lot has happened since then. The Ukrainian defense, so in the east, defense forces continue to hold back the offensive of the Russian troops in the Kupiansk and Liman directions. There, the enemy is looking for weaknesses in our defense, shelling, attacking with infantry groups, and using special forces, trying to push our defense with all of its might, but to no avail. Our defenders in these areas are taking all the measures necessary to stop the enemy. In the Bakhmut sector, our troops continue to successfully conduct offensive operations in the southern flank around the town of Bakhmut. Fierce fighting continues in the area of Klishchivka, Kodymivka, and Andriivka. The enemy is clinging to every meter of occupied land, putting up strong resistance, using reserves, and suffering significant losses. To the south, the Ukrainian Defense Forces continue to conduct offensive operations at the Melitopol and Berdyansk directions, gradually advancing. Fighting continues in the area of Staromilsky. Our defenders are making progress, consolidating their positions. The enemy is trying to regain lost positions, in particular northeast of Robotna in the Zaporizhia region, but to no avail. Okay, so generally there's a lot of activity taking place. Wargonzo, Russian source, saying this morning, an early report, the Ukrainians are entrenched inside Staromilske and are advancing to Urizhny. So that's on the Velika Novosilka. In the Velika Novosilka sector, you've got Urizhny, then Staromilske, and then Priutne, kind of in a row. Staromilske and Urizhny are next to each other. There were claims that there was some success in Staromilsky yesterday. It appears that the Ukrainians are at least very much in Staromilsky. Whether the whole of it is under their control is unclear right at the moment. Russian forces retreated from Nadia, west of Ryahorodka. That's on the Luhansk front line. They'd taken a bunch of small settlements up to the west of Svatova. It could be that they have actually suffered a counterattack from the Ukrainians there and have moved out of Nadia. The front line is leveled off, according to no reports. And the Russian forces did a failed counterattack in Kodymivka, that's in the Bakhmut area. That's just from War Gonzo this morning. Then we have a summary last night from Radu Hosu. Orikhiv Tokmak axis. The Ukrainian army has advanced 5 kilometers east of Robotna and 2 kilometers west of Robotna. In the last 24 hours, they're also attacking directly from the north. Velika Novosilka axis, the Ukrainian army has entered Staromilsky. Russian sources say that they have passed this locality, but there is no visual confirmation of this other than they are shelling Russian positions south of Staromilsky. So they could have gone past Staromilsky. There are differing claims as to whether they've gone past Robotna as well. Kherson axis, the Ukrainians have extended its bridgehead towards Oleshki and taken control of several islands on the east bank of the Dnipro River. And Bakhmut, Andriivka is at least partially liberated. Ukrainian sources say that the town is completely liberated, and Russians do not deny this information. The place is important because there can be from there they can blockade the T0513, which is an important communication line for the Russians. Klishchivka is 30 to 40% liberated, and there are pictures of Russian troops retreating from the town in disarray, so on and so forth. So that's a kind of update there. So we go to Suryat Mat's a pro-Russian mapper saying that Ukrainian army retreated from a place called Tverdokilabove. Nevertheless, troops still in control of the adjacent hills, which prevented the Russian army from advancing westwards. Moreover, Ukrainian reinforcements managed to stabilize the front 2 kilometers west of Nadia. The claim is that Nadia itself was taken back by the Ukrainians, as we saw in the last from the last few sources. don't know if that's definitely the case, but there's a stabilization certainly of this front, I would say, at the least. There's another interesting account from a Russian officer. Sorry, long post again, but he tells what led to the Ukrainian success in Klishchivka, including Russia bringing up unprepared troops from various units into an area, describing them as disorganized. He also mentions relentless shelling and drone attacks. A long excerpt, but you can read more of it in the original source. So let's just dip into this a little bit. So, uh, right, the enemy is successful south of Bakhmut due to what reasons? First and main reason, the loss of combat capability of the units in the area. The command decided that there were more units, it puts it per kilometre of the front, the more chances there are of stable defence. This was a main miscalculation. Now I'd list the things that I only saw. They demand to send people in a position, let's say 100 people having entered the area. We see that it is teeming with people. To organise a proper defence, it was simply necessary to deploy several strong points, establish contact with artillery, and in principle, the task of holding that would be completed. We heard this from another source saying that the Russians have been manning trench areas that are prepared, was supposed to be for 30 people with 150 or 100 people or whatever. And so, yeah, this is a claim that's come from several different areas. That doesn't necessarily mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that the more people you have there, the better you are going to do defensively. Then he continues, as fresh forces should appear, we should rotate and have a reserve of resting units if the situation worsens. This is a classic approach, but in reality, we see a layer cake of units that are simply pushed into unequipped lines there. There are so many people that every 10 to 15 meters, someone is hiding under the remnants of greenery, in holes, not even preparing for any kind of defense, with a full superiority of the enemy in drones that work non-stop day and night, and in weapons, because if something isn't flying at you within a minute, then the enemy must be tired. Two mortars, starving for shells, are not capable of adequately resisting the carousel of fire from tank guns or drones dropping munitions, which are constantly hitting our ranks. There are units that sit there for months, having lost up to two-thirds of their composition and almost all of their equipment. By the way, it is from these guys that you can hear that there was order under the Wagners. The main joke of the guys after another set of arrivals is we haven't even started yet. There are units that spend most of their service in easy areas who, without heavy equipment in service and therefore the ability to respond, they simply lose their composure and run shamefully. I had to shoot in the air to stop the run. If those who have already settled down have at least some positions equipped in engineering terms, be it just covered dugouts, without the possibility of firing, then the newcomers, it's a good thing if they dig a hole to spend the night. During the shelling, they suffer losses, carry out the wounded and the dead, and the command drives a new batch there, and the cycle repeats. With proper artillery support, the section could be held by a detachment of 2 companies. When the fourth unit of a comparable size, 4 different communication systems, was brought there, still not having their own artillery, everything broke down and everyone ran. Mountains of ammo lying around at delivery points are not used in any way. You can be telling people for hours to prepare tripwires, but if people don't want to, they won't. And boxes with anti-tank mines are just lying around. That is, the units are not ready to perform the task. They're just mentally depressed and waiting for their turn. I thought it was worth sharing that with you. That's an insight of a Russian that I think talks to the idea of morale having a real impact on the performance of troops, a lack of organization, the lack of cohesion between different elements, the artillery, drones, infantry, uh, lack of equipment or equipment just not being used, so on and so forth. Just, yeah, all sorts of issues going on for the Russians around there. Then this is from P Star One talking about himself not knowing if it's true whether the New York Times article, you know, whether there really is this big thrust for the Ukrainians. However, there are a couple of interesting information pieces coming out near Robotna, a highly defended settlement. Ukrainians have managed to flank the Russians by bypassing east of it, advance of 4 to 5 kilometers. But the most interesting area, in his opinion, is around Staromyolsk, where Ukraine almost controls the entire settlement. Differing claims here. We've heard 30 to 40%. Oh no, that was Klishchivka. But we've heard basically half of it in Staromyolsk, but it could be all of it. And here he reckons almost all of it. Russian sources report that unless measures are taken very fast, Russian troops east of the Mokry Yali River, so that's a river that meanders down that separates Uruzhany and Staromyolsk, the 36th Army are at risk of being flanked and find themselves stuck between the river and the Ukrainians. The Russians at Staromilsk, under the command of the Fifth Army, are about to retreat. The river is the intersection between the two Russian commands, and Russians are not good at coordination. We've heard this before, where you've got two groupings of Russian troops. Actually, they don't work very well together. The river is the intersection between the two Russian commands, and they're not good at coordination. When the Fifth Army retreats, Uruzhani is likely to be liberated without much fight because there will be no possibility to supply the Russians there. There are only two bridges. One links Uruzhani to Staromilsk, and the second one is probably the short-term target for Ukrainians flanking the Russians. In these scenarios, if these scenarios materialize, it opens the way to Staromilivka, which is to the south of there, where the Russian main defense line stands. And if there's a breakthrough there, then there is nothing significant until Mariupol. So that is some, pretty positive views there about what's going on in the Velika Novosilka area. Romanov, who's a Russian source, says there's a very serious risk of Russians leaving the village of Staromilsk, which will lead to the surrender of Uruzhani. He says the Russian command is unable to contain the situation. That's sort of similar to what we've just been hearing. And then we go on to Robotna. So that's Velika Novosilka sector, which is on the border of the Zaporizhzhia and Donetsk Oblast. Then we move further to the west to Robotna. Satellite imagery, says Andrew Perpetua, is a map I refer to a lot. Drone video and other such sources all point towards Ukraine having a lot more success around Robotna than otherwise depicted. Now weigh this against the apparent panic Russians have today regarding Ukrainian assaults. Also, keep in mind pretty much all Russian communications are on a delay. Events they claim are today are almost certainly not from today. The only real exception are huge events they cannot hide, like missile strikes. That's interesting. We've also heard that there are communications have been lost in certain places on the front line that the Ukrainians are attacking. So the Russians have lost communication with their own kind of units operating around there. Ukrainian forces advanced today. So there are various claims about Robotna. Here we got the claim that the Ukrainians advanced 1 kilometer in the direction of Verbove, northeast of Robotna. So that's from the northeast towards Verbove is actually not northeast of Robotna. So it's going sort of down in that direction. Then we have situation of Robotna, reports of a large attack consisting of tanks and armed vehicles. Via geolocated footage, it is confirmed that Ukrainian forces advanced 1.5 kilometers south and reached near the forest belts where the Russian defensive positions are located. So that's a claim of a geolocated advance, or geolocated claim of an advance to I presume that's east of Robotna and then towards the south. The situation remains unclear as Russian sources reported about heavy Ukrainian losses, but at the same time, Russian Rebar indirectly confirmed on their map that the Ukrainians have control over the large forest areas northeast of Robotna and are or have been establishing defensive positions there. So that is Robotna, and we have these moves down to the east and possibly moves down to the west as well. Obviously, Russians claiming Ukrainians are taking heavy losses. They could be taking heavy losses. They are on the attack in heavily mined and well-defended areas, but there are various claims. So here we have the claim that actually they've made 4 to 5 kilometers gain. So 47th Separate Motorized Brigade with the 78th Assault Battalion at the of the Armed Forces of Ukraine have an advance of up to 4 to 5 kilometers in the direction of Robotna. That's fairly vague. According to Russian sources, Ukrainians have resumed their offensive in the Robotna direction. So that's from this morning. And then Kenneth Gregg says, Deep State have confirmed the stalling of the Russians in the north. In addition, we have taken back lots of land that was lost. Also at Ryarodka, so that's going right back up to Luhansk. The reason was, that I mentioned earlier, the Russians do not get their maintenance through. One thing that the media is now trumpeting about is that we are attacking massively at Staromilsk and east of Robotna. Again, exaggerations. We are attacking with the same manpower as before. The claim that we would attack with up to 80 heavy vehicles is a lie. So he's actually denying that, but there are many other claims to support that. So, just trying to let you know. The fact that the editors allow such claims to be published in the newspaper is sad. Do they not know how large an area 80 heavy vehicles require? The following has enabled us to move a little faster and even penetrate Russian defense lines. We have demined the area. The Russians' mental and physical health has collapsed. They have had the same manpower for months, and when they see 4 of our armored vehicles approaching, they think that they see 12. This is perfectly natural thing when you are tired, worn out, and want to leave. This also means that panic spreads very quickly. During the day, we will see more successes for our people on all front lines. Then there will be regrouping to prepare the penetration for the main Russian defense lines, on some fronts by frontal attack and others by counter-attacking areas. How and where the different attacks will be used is under the fog of war, but by looking at the maps, the clever person can figure out some information. So basically, he's like, yeah, not so much. And you can see that seems plausible as well. Um, Multiple Russian sources report that invaders are holding out in Avdiivka and Robotna. As there are no counter indications from Ukraine, it's likely that the status quo remains on the front line for now. So that was just Tim White's latest tuppence there. And no reports has, and Alexander Khodorkovsky, commander of the pro-Russian Vostok battalion, reports that Russian forces lost Staromilska. That's literally just come out this morning. Quote, the loss of the settlement after stubborn and no doubt heroic defense is a blow to our military pride. We are waiting for official and or visual confirmation. Yeah, so lots could be happening there today, right up and down the front line. Differing accounts as to how successful the Ukrainians have been. Right, moving on to military aid now. White House, Ukrainian pilots to receive F-16 training in Denmark and Romania. Ukrainian pilots uh, are going to get training on those jets in those places, although I'm not too sure. However, the official noted that other details of the training scheme are not yet finalised. The dates, the locations, the length of the syllabus, all of that's still being worked out. And possibly who's providing the airframes, I don't know as well. But I get this as I talked about this yesterday, saying when you've got a coalition of people, no one kind of knows what each other is doing or who wants to do what, or you kind of have this, it's called de-individualization, if you want to know about it, in terms of groups, and you kind of you defer moral responsibility to the group rather than take it on yourself. And that can present problems when you get together and say, yeah, we're all going to do this, right? Brilliant. And then they end up kind of not really being organized enough to do anything because everyone's expecting someone else to do it. And I think like the US have walked in and said, right, come on, move over. Right. The adults are in the room now. Right. Okay. This is what's happening. Bosh, 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 bosh. Right. Sort it out, guys, now. And so I think maybe the US have taken control, realizing that it's, I don't want to like slag off Europe and the coalition, you know, entities there unnecessarily, but I guess someone had to kind of take control. Maybe talking about airframes, this is the UK intelligence update with regard to Ka-52s. We had Ka-52 taken down yesterday. In recent months, Russia has highly likely augmented the force in the south with at least a small number of brand new Ka-52M variants, a heavily modified aircraft informed by lessons from Russia's experience in Syria. Evidence supporting the M variants used in Ukraine includes photos posted on social media of aircrew posing next to the new aircraft and thanking well-wishers for sending them morale items. Another key improvement to the Ka-52 fleet is the integration of a new anti-tank missile, the LMUR, which has a range of approximately 15 kilometers. Right, this is really significant. So I previously told you that they have an advantage over man-pads, man-portable air defense systems like the Stingers that the Ukrainian troops can use to shoot down aircraft. And these things can be mounted on different vehicles like the Avenger and so on and so forth. But it still only gives you a kind of 5 kilometer range. Now, the Ka-52 helicopters I said that they had anti-tank guided missiles that had an 8 kilometer range. Well, if they're using a new one that has a 15 kilometer range, then this really does give the Ka-52 a range advantage. It means they can sit back in far safer airspace, shoot Ukrainian ground equipment and tanks and IFVs, and be relatively safe. from at least those short-range systems. What you need is a kind of medium-range system to be able to take that out, so something more permanent, something more robust, and you then need to bring those to the front, but then it makes them more vulnerable themselves. Yeah, Ka-52 crews have been quick to exploit opportunities to launch these weapons beyond the range of Ukrainian air defenses. That is a challenge for sure. Right, here we have Zelensky saying, I heard the current reports on the supply of weapons and ammunition. There are reinforcements to our air defense system. It will be directed to where it's needed, most needed now. Likely going to the south, says no reports, which is subject to missile strikes lately. Don't know. That's kind of incredibly vague. Is that something like a Patriot type air defense system being sent to the south? Is that somewhere in the middle? Are they Hawk air defense systems? Or what is it, and exactly what the details, don't know, but he feels pretty positive about air defenses in that regard. Prime Minister of Ukraine inspects the Ukrainian development of K drones, so loitering munitions. Well, more than a loitering munition, looking at the size of that, similar to those seen during strikes on the far Russian rear, mainly Moscow. Denis Shmyhal also said that the government has allocated 40 billion hryvnias, which it would invest in drone manufacturers. Drones are obviously a central component of the Ukrainian military. They are a huge variable in their success or in their potential success. And the Ukrainians are putting a lot of investment there into that. On the other hand, you have China doing stuff like this. And I'm just going to refer to Ukraine the latest. I did talk about this yesterday, but it's just a nice synopsis here from them.
The other is a recent investigation by Politico, which is an extension of their earlier work into China's military support of Russia, which we reported on several months ago. Politico are now arguing that China secretly sends enough gear to Russia to equip an army. So, according to customs records obtained by Politico, Russian buyers have declared orders for hundreds of thousands of bulletproof vests and helmets made by Shanghai H-Win. The items listed in the documents match those in the company's online catalogue, they say. The protective gear would be sufficient to equip many of the men mobilised by Russia since the invasion. Then there are drones that can be used to direct artillery fire or drop grenades, and thermal optical sights to target the enemy at night. Russia has imported more than $100 million worth of drones from China so far this year, 30 times more than Ukraine.
That is phenomenal, right? That is phenomenal.
And Chinese export of ceramics, which is of course a key component in body armour, increased by 69% to Russia to more than $225 million, while dropping, I think this is very significant, by 61% to Ukraine to a mere $5 million. And again, this is coming off the back of Chinese and Ukrainians' custom data. Now, of course, there are reasons to think why there may be that drop in the Ukrainian purchasing from China, maybe due to security concerns, it may be because they're receiving more from their Western allies. But nonetheless, it does seem to suggest there's something political going on here, as well as it just being that factor. So Politico say, and I'm quoting here, evidence of this kind shows that China, despite Beijing's calls for peace, is pushing right up to a red line in delivering enough non-lethal but militarily useful equipment to Russia to have a material impact on Putin's 17-month-old war on Ukraine. The ambiguity surrounding the dual-use status of this equipment, coupled with the fact that a significant portion of it is manufactured in China, seems, at least for now, to have placed the possibility of the West taking meaningful action beyond reach. The piece does, however, offer some reflections on what might be done to enforce sanctions and stop this. It's, of course, an ongoing subject of conversation. Many this morning are also commentating on international failures to curb Iran's providing of drones to Russia that, of course, are being used in some of the heinous civilian attacks that we've discussed recently. This is the CNN report. So they've published a piece citing US intelligence officials who have warned Russia is building a drone manufacturing facility in the country with Iran's help. Analysts from the Defense Intelligence Agency told a small group of reporters that the drone manufacturing facility now under construction is expected to provide Russia with a new drone stockpile that is orders of magnitude larger, that's a quote from them, that than would have been possible to procure from Iran.
And I talked about it yesterday. So you get the idea that actually China are giving meaningful military assistance, even if it's not like offensive weapons, is non-lethal equipment that actually can make the difference on the battlefield. Now, when you then see Shoigu at the moment in North Korea, schmoozing with the North Korean leadership, and no doubt coming back with orders, for, ticked off orders for huge amounts of ammunition. We also see that there are sort of Burmese or Myanmar from ammunition from Myanmar being found in Russian service. So it doesn't really matter. Like, you may look at this and go, "Oh my goodness, they're getting like ammunition from Myanmar," and think somehow less of Russia. It doesn't make any difference whether that is coming from Germany or Myanmar. That's a mortar bomb that is going to cause damage, and Russia are able to get it from somewhere. They're able to get ammunition from Iran, from Myanmar, from possibly North Korea now. And so, even if they're not getting it from China, this is a challenge for the Ukrainians and for their allies going forward. How do you deal, particularly with China? How do you get them to curtail that non-lethal military aid to Russia? Right, going on to geopolitical things. The Italian Senate has recognized the Holodomor as a genocide. Remember that the enforced genocide through starvation in Stalin's Soviet Union of Ukraine, 7 to 10 million people died, and it's being recognized as a genocide by more and more nations. Italy's Senate has done so, so that's really good. It's again this cultural pressure on Russia to kind of understand their place in history and understand, hey, we all have this opinion of you, and your opinion of your own like history and your own sense of identity still hasn't come to terms with your own history, and maybe you need to do that. I talked about this in terms of how the difference between Germany coming to terms with their own history with the Second World War and Hitler, but Russia haven't seemed to have done that. There's still this rose-tinted glasses view of Soviet Russia, because their dalliance with capitalism hasn't really worked as well as it should have done, and it's lined the pockets of a very small oligarchy and elite, and that money hasn't spread out across Russia effectively. So I think there's many people who look back at the Soviet era in with much more positivity than it deserves, and they haven't come to terms with the horrors that took place in the Soviet era in a way that Germany has, and I think it's really important. Right, the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, does not invite Russia and Belarus to 2024 Olympic Games, so they're not inviting them. However, they haven't made a decision on Russian and Belarusian citizens competing as neutral athletes, but promised to resolve the issue at an appropriate time. Interesting. Ukrainian MOD press center reports that it has information that Russia is preparing ships and aircraft to blockade the Black Sea areas after withdrawal from the grain deal. So I've talked a little bit about how they've been possibly laying mines as well, but yeah, there is an effective blockade. It looks to be an effective blockade in the making there, to stop Ukraine getting grain out to the wider world. Thanks, Russia. Should say countries like China, India, and African nations too. And it's interesting. There's an Africa presently. I probably should have included this. There's a Russia Africa conference going on where actually they have been bemoaning not as many African nations have turned up as they were hoping. But yeah, that's taking place now. I'd hope that Russia might be under a little bit of heat by some of those nations, but I don't think there will be in terms of, hey, grain. Thanks for that. US President Biden, this is huge actually, has ordered evidence of Russian war crimes in Ukraine to be turned over to the International Criminal Court, writes the New York Times. So US has loads of evidence of war crimes, right? But they haven't been giving that across the ICC because they fear that it opens the floodgates to US being hammered by the ICC themselves for war crimes, for past war crimes, and then going forward as well. They've kind of been they're a funny one, the US, with regard to stuff like this. This is really important. Actually, Biden's done this a bit on the quiet, but it is a major shift in policy, as mentioned here. The move marks a major shift in US policy and ended months of resistance from the Pentagon, which feared setting a precedent that could pave the way for prosecution of US troops, according to the New York Times. But this is morally correct. This is Biden doing the right thing, and it's important because it will help to prosecute Russians after this war and possibly even during it. Who knows? Moldova has announced it will deport 59 Russian diplomats, read spies, after uncovering a spying network. Who knew? At the Russian embassy in Chisinau. I mean, Russian diplomats are spies. That's just the way it goes. Right. Now, onto this is kind of American, but it might have American bit of news, but it might have some impact on Ukraine because actually the US can't fill loads of empty military officer spaces. Military nominations are being held up by Tommy Tuberville, who's a Republican senator who is incurring the wrath of many. Now there might be many Republicans who think, yeah, good on you, because what he's doing is he's saying US troops shouldn't be allowed access or supported in access to reproductive health care, right? So this is all like linked to abortion, or it's actually much wider than abortion. And he's kind of going down a culture war thing where he's saying, right, if you're going to allow them access to reproductive care, then I'm going to withhold these nominations, which is holding the US defense to it's holding them ransom. It's blackmail, and it's terrible, and it's getting partisan politics involved in national security. And you've got a lot of women in the armed forces, a growing number of women who are like, well, you're going to do that, I ain't going to be in the armed forces type thing. So this no one wants this apart from the fevered few over here who will be arguing that abortion is more important than anything else in the universe. And it's like, anyway, so as you can see from all of these articles, military spouses to the GOP's Tuberville abandon unpatriotic tactic. Military families request enter Senate hold on DOD nomination. Biden blasts Tuberville's hold on the military nominations as totally irresponsible. Even in Mail Online, Senator Tammy Duckworth calls it beyond disgusting that Tuberville is blocking military promotions. Right. Now, there's a letter now from military leaders, retired military leaders, condemning Tuberville, his hold on nominations. And this is, if you have a look here, one of the names there is Ben Hodges, who we refer to a lot in terms of what's going on in Ukraine. Military promotions have for generations been an apolitical process. The Senate has historically approved promotions on a bipartisan basis, recognizing the importance of orderly transition of military command. Senators have a prerogative to hold nominations, and there is precedent for doing so in the interest of good faith engagement with the Defense Department on matters relevant to the nominations. Blah, 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 blah. But past holds have been resolved in a timely manner, demonstrating devotion of all parties to national security over partisan politics. But Tuberville's brinkmanship with the DOD sends the opposite message to our officers that regardless how well you serve your country over the course of decades, your promotion is now subject to partisan politics. That message will cause our most talented officers to reconsider life in the military when they can easily attain stability and a good income if they retire from the service. To inject partisan politics into the process, therefore, is to threaten the national security of the US. It's deeply regrettable, blah, blah, blah. So this is really strong rhetoric from a whole bunch of retired, a whole bunch of veteran officers. It's just, not a good look. Right, and the last thing I'm going to say is Armenia. I love this. Armenia announces it won't be able to participate in the upcoming CSTO. So the CSTO is kind of like a NATO equivalent of the Caucasus, right? These nations around there on the map. As you can see, these are all members. You have different levels of membership, But Armenia won't be participating in the upcoming CSTO exercise in Belarus due to a very busy schedule. It's like Russia's phoned up Armenia and said, well, actually more like WhatsApp. It's phoned up Armenia and said, "Oh, mate, do you want to come to the pub tonight?" And Armenia's gone, "Oh, is that Russia? All right, mate. Yeah, I'm a bit busy tonight. Busy? What are you doing? There's something on Netflix. I've got to watch. Yeah, but that's on demand. You can watch it whenever. Oh, yeah, no. Actually, my nan's coming around. We're doing a jigsaw together or something. You what? You did do that instead of coming out with me? Uh, yeah. I ain't telling you something, Russia. You ain't you ain't all that in a bag of chips. So Armenia, that's a real big snub. Yeah, we've got a busy schedule. Can't do CSTO. Anyway, thank you so much for your support. Really appreciate that. Please like, subscribe, and share. And thanks so much to Dot Bunny on Twitter, who has done a little meme there. All the quackers are quacking the same quack. I appear to be a big fan of strangling ducks. So I like to get my ducks in a row and all of them cracking the same quack. Although I don't want all of you cracking the same quack. I want freedom of quacking. Anyway, whatever. Thanks so much, everybody. And Dot Bunny, take care. Speak soon.